Jesus began to teach them all that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. But Peter took him aside, and he began to rebuke Jesus. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter. And he said, "Get behind me, you Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And he called the crowd with his disciples. And he said to them all, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." You see, those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake, for the sake of the gospel, they will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for this life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You know, there are some sayings like this. My mother-in-law is a cross to bear. My husband is a cross to bear. This ruptured disc in my spine is my cross to bear. That accident is a cross to bear. None of that's accurate. None of that has anything to do with what Jesus the Nazarene is talking about today. Look, bad stuff happens to you, bad stuff happens to me, bad stuff happens to us. That's got nothing to do with the cross. It's just wrong to whine about, oh, this is my cross to bear, there's traffic today. Cut it out. What is Jesus talking about when he says, those who want to follow me, let them pick up their cross? Follow me. This is Jesus picks up his cross. What does he mean? He's talking very specifically about the cost of discipleship. That if you are following Jesus, God is not going to bring trouble upon you. Life is going to bring trouble upon you for following Jesus. There's a cost to discipleship. Which means that discipleship is also a very valuable kind of thermometer. If in no way we experience ever any backlash for following Jesus, if we follow no backlash for following Jesus, are we following Jesus? So I was thinking about the cost of discipleship and how in our life stories this happens. That by attempting to put Christ first, to follow Christ, to pick up our cross and follow him, that it's important to be able to say that in our stories. So today I'm going to say some of my story. It's not really important. It's not certainly not the central fact. But what it might do, what I mean to do, is help you to kind of stimulate thinking about your own following Christ and picking up the cross and your own cost of discipleship. And then the sadness and irritation in that, the confusion and shock in that, also some of the tenderness and the love, the closeness to Christ in it. So my first story takes place right after I learned the very first truth about following Jesus and picking up the cross. The very first one.
Whoever wants to follow me, let them deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow me.
I heard this message loud and clear in 5th grade, and it was through my Sunday school teachers for 5 years. I was going to a school where my best friend was Tim Lynch. He was a fantastic artist and a cartoonist. He was also somehow a person who thought it was most funny to mock and hurt other people. We were 5th graders together, and all the 5th graders decided that year to mock a girl who was in 5th grade with us, whose name was Raylene. Now, Raylene was very nice, but she was a little weird, a little socially unacceptable. And birds like that in 5th grade often get picked by the other birds. So the nickname for Raylene that my friend Tim made up was Gorp. And he even drew a newsletter each week about the adventures of Gorp. And while his artwork was stunning, it was extremely hurtful. And Raylene would always be seen somewhere in the coat closet or behind her desk with her face ragged and her face in her hands. Apparently had no friends. Tim was my close friend. I was a 5th grader with him. And I was with the cool kids who drew pictures. It just didn't sit right, though. It just didn't feel right. And the things I learned about following Christ and picking up the cross, would somebody treat this girl really in this way? Things got to a head because she won a prize for a spelling bee, which was a box of Cracker Jacks. And she wrapped it in her coat and then put her coat in a locker. But Tim and some of the other boys came and they took the coat and the Cracker Jacks and they hid it. And she went to the locker and it was a big joke and she cried. And she was a very sensitive soul and a little strange. And I knew what I had to do in response to this first idea. Can I borrow someone's coat? So can I talk to you, Raylene? Come on up. So, here's the coat, and it has the Cracker Jacks in it. It was a stupid thing for them to do, and I don't know, sometimes I think they're fun, but they're kind of jerks sometimes. Anyways, I wanted to give it back to you.
Thank you. Sorry, your friends are mad at me.
That's okay, they'll get over it.
You want to come see my horse sometime?
I really don't like horses too much, but thanks for offering. Okay, all right. Thanks. Take it easy, okay? Don't let them bother you so much. That's when, soon after, I incurred the wrath of those kids who used to be my friends. And at this point, the person that I could really go to talk with was my grandmother. When I was little, I couldn't say grandma, so I got to name her. I called her Era. And Era was the wise person in my family. So I wanted to talk to my Era after this happened, and Tim and none of the kids would talk to me anymore. I said, you know, I tried to be a Christian and do what Jesus would want us to do. And then it wasn't good stuff that happened, it was bad stuff that happened. Does God want us to suffer? Does God make us suffer?
No, it is not God's plan for you to hurt or suffer. God doesn't want you to suffer, but Jesus tells us that sometimes in trying to follow Him, need to remember, Jesus never leaves us alone.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad.
You're
Thank you.
welcome, sweetie.
So, a couple of years later, I was still thinking about this cross thing. And it was the third thing that I learned about the cross. Third important thing.
The cross is foolishness to those who think they are wise, but for us, God's wisdom is wiser than the foolishness of human thinking.
I thought about that. The things we think are wise are really foolish before God. Sometimes God's ways are foolish in the sight of human beings. Starting to understand that. You know, I was a patrol leader in the Boy Scouts, and I worked hard to get this badge. It meant that I was in charge of a patrol. To me, I was always working with planning and events and training for my patrol. My scoutmaster was a really tough guy. But he came to me in all his meanness and toughness, and he said, "You did a good job. Welcome to being a patrol leader." And I was very proud. Now, what we were going to do is have our first patrol. And when we would do this, first patrol meeting, I was in charge of securing the food so that we'd have groceries as a patrol when we went on the camp out. I was in charge of that, and I was in charge of then leading my patrol. And on the night, as I was preparing with such excitement to be the patrol leader, I was thinking of John Wayne in the movies, about how he would lead all kinds of troops in battle. But I noticed that when I went to bed, my mom, like other nights, had not come home. And I lay awake in bed listening for her. About 5 o'clock in the morning, I heard something smash and drop. So I went down to the living room, and I saw her passed out on the floor. And this had happened other times. And I thought, why did it have to happen tonight before my patrol meeting? But I couldn't let her lay there, so I just kind of pulled her. And I got her up as far as I could onto the couch. And she was very drunk. And one of the things that I had read is that as a Boy Scout, if people vomit while they're asleep, they can choke to death. So I knew what following the cross, picking up my cross meant. I just sat there all the night next to her, listening to her breathing, making sure she was okay. And in the morning, I called people to tell them I couldn't come on the camp out, but they had already left. So it wasn't until Wednesday that I saw my patrol leader.
Douglas,
Sir,
you're not responsible enough to be a scout leader. I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to turn in your scout leader badge.
sorry.
And son, you need to grow up.
Yes, sir. Throughout the years, I learned another thing about following Christ and the cross. I learned the fifth thing. The fifth thing that was, as I got older, it sometimes didn't get easier, but it somehow became deeper and wiser. So, for instance, in my marriage over the years, the first 10 years, I refused to say I'm sorry. Why should I? I'm always right. Then I learned and thought about this picking up the cross and following Christ. And I thought to myself, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to pick up the cross and apologize, not because it'll keep peace or keep things happy, but because I saw Christ as a part of my relationship. And in picking up the cross, it was being willing to admit that I was wrong and to say I'm sorry.
Don't get so full of yourself.
I won't. I won't get so full of myself. Thank you. On the last Halloween that my girls were getting dressed up, it was a time that I loved. I loved Halloween with my girls. Loved it. And I loved the fact that we as a family would really get into it. And I would get dressed and Noelle would get dressed, and I had missed a couple of Halloweens because of, well, I was a pastor and things were going on, but this was the last Halloween that I would be able to see them. And I had picked out my costume carefully. And the girls thought it was pretty phenomenal. It came with a can of spinach. And it had a hat. It was very exciting. I was very excited. I don't know if the girls were all that excited about it. But we got dressed and they got dressed. It was the last time because they reach a certain age. You know this where it's not hip anymore. It's kind of lame to get dressed up. And then they start going to friends' parties. But I had been working with Troy and her husband Cliff. And Cliff had twice been given surgery for liver cancer. He was a young dad. The daughter, Olivia, was 6. And he was dying. Just as my family, my girls, looking so good, so Halloween, they're still little children, just as they're going out, my cell phone goes off in my pocket. And you come to the hospital, Cliff is dying. So I went and I sat all that night, and I didn't see them at Halloween. And hurt, and I was angry, I was resentful. And Cliff died that night after I anointed him. I was with Olivia and I was with Troy.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you for bringing us Jesus.
There's a line from the confession that occurred to me.
Father, help us so that we may grow into the full stature of Jesus Christ. From the prayer of confession.
It was at that moment that I realized that in picking up the cross, that something wonderful happened to me, something wonderful happens to us. For a few moments, I was Jesus, present to a dying young dad, his wife, and his daughter. Just for a few moments, I was in the stature of Christ. I would fall out of it and be my regular old stimpy self. But for a few moments, I got to not worship Jesus, but to be Jesus. And isn't this the awesome power of what it means to be people of the cross? That the real meaning for picking up the cross and incurring the suffering isn't for the suffering's sake, but because it's then that we most realize He's in us and we're in Him. And that's where true peace, true life reside. Power of the cross, power of the powerless. Here's good news for us today.